place while I was away. But my first meeting was that momentous day when he was released. And I imagined anxious, of course, and nervous about meeting someone who you spend most of your life fighting for his freedom. And then to encounter him, and then you sort of don't know what to expect. And so he comes to the door, and he's tall and towering and imposing, and completely unlike the last photographs we had seen him as a boxer, you know. And he says, "Hello, my comrades, how are you? Come into my house." And then he proceeds to give us a guided tour of his house. This is the bedroom. You know, I couldn't sleep in this bedroom. It is too big, so I used the smaller bedroom. And then, "Do you want some tea and biscuits?" And the warrant officer jumps up and, you know, it's like the whole world is waiting for him. And then, you know, as people come in, there's a furious debate about where he should speak. And, you know, there were strong opinions that he had to speak in Soweto. It was the crucible of our struggle. But he just continued making sure everyone had a cup of tea and they had biscuits, and for like hours, while the whole world is waiting. He's just listening. And then finally...
And no one has the audacity to say, "Hello, Madiba, we need to go."
No, well, of course, we sort of, you know, the debate is too fractious. You know, it's quite, you know, tense debate about it, you know, and strong opinions on it. And eventually, after a few hours, Madiba says, "I've heard all of you speak. This has been my home for 27 years, and this is where I am going to speak." And so that was my first encounter with the man. And it is an extraordinary ability he has to listen to people and take all their views in, but end up with a very firm viewpoint. And people accept it.
And that was to continue.
And that was the character that was continuing. I never at any stage felt I was working for Madiba. We always worked with him.
Okay. We're going to get to, you know, the spending time with him in cabinet and all those other things a little later. But did you have a specific role to play on the day of his release?
Yeah, I was part of the National Reception Committee. I was the General Secretary of Cosatu. And my most specific role, you know, I mean, if you look at that footage of that first day, the most expensive car that we could get was a Toyota Cressida. The rest of us had like really half broken down Toyotas. You know, it's completely different to today.
Yes, definitely.
And those were the good days, you know, where there was integrity in our struggle, where justice, social justice and human dignity meant something.
But is it that, though, just to digress a bit, is it that, though, or is it a question of, you know, things change?
Well, things do change, but, you know, value should never change. Value should never change. I think today the people spoke. And they said, we want to reclaim the movement, the freedom struggle, and the values that Mandela stood for. And that means we need leaders who serve the interests of the citizens, not the party political interests, not their government interests, not their business interests or their personal interests. And I think people have spoken very clearly, because Mandela was this extraordinary person. You know, people never looked... You know, Mandela, in his sense, was, you know, he never looked, you know, at people admiring him for his leadership, because he never thought that that was his job. He held these people up there, not looking at them down here. He did not treat people as subjects. He treated them as part of his own personality and his own humanity.
Okay, let's go back. Let's go back to that day. Let's go back to that day. Now, there you are, you leaving Victor Verster.
Oh yeah, and my job that day is security guard. Because remember this extraordinary thing, that he was released. We had no transport, we didn't have cell phones and walkie-talkies, we didn't have proper cars, and we didn't have any security. So I was the security guard in the car in front of him. And so we navigate and we go into town, and even we, the ones that had organize the mass democratization and the ability to control what happened on that day. In fact, we lost Madiba for an hour or two. And it's like a day which we will never repeat. In a sense, today was closing a chapter. It was closing that virtuous circle. It's an is to make that democracy and the rights that are contained in that constitution meaningful and real in people's everyday lives, especially for the millions of.
Now, you outside that library.
Yes.
There he is. Cyril Ramaphosa holding the mic.
Planning what the next steps were.
So you
Because
could
remember,
hardly listen to the speech.
I mean, we had seen the speech before. Together, the sort of following days, you know, because I think that even us did not anticipate that huge attention that Mandela's release captured and the expectation that rose in the country, not just in our own constituency, but amongst whites, amongst the minorities, amongst the international community.
That, I mean, so many people spend so much time, I mean, fighting for his release. I mean, the world over, there were concerts, there were rallies, there was like everything being done in his name. So how could you not have imagined that the kind of response that you got eventually?
Well, first of all, his release came at a point where we were putting the plan together. And it isn't a plan to which there is some prototype. There was no prototype to the way forward. We were navigated by trial and error because you didn't know what to expect day to day. We did not expect that on Mandela's release, in the midst of the explosion of euphoria, we would see violence on a greater scale than we've ever seen in our country. That there were such powerful forces that were orchestrating that violence. So, in hindsight, yes, there were things that we could have done better. I accept that. And on the day, it was almost impossible to foretell what the next step was going to be.
Now let's go beyond that very first day. Where then do you fit in? What becomes your job? Or what do you then do with him?
Well, I then am General Secretary of Cosatu. We've deployed a number of people into the negotiating team because that's what Cosatu did produce. We had produced negotiators because we spent all our life negotiating with employers. And in fact, some of those negotiations, imagine those huge strikes and stayaways, the mine workers' strike of 360,000 workers. I mean, those negotiations were as complex as negotiations on the political settlement. And we had built up a track record of negotiating capability. We had built up a movement with 50,000 shop stewards in it. It was an army. And so our job was to help set up the ANC, deploy people to help their negotiating team, and in any negotiations, you know, negotiations is not about clever leaders making very nice speeches on platforms and holding press conferences. It's about power. If you do not have power, no matter how clever you are, you achieve nothing in a negotiation. So we had to marshal our forces, especially when we were under attack. And my job was in Cosatu to do that. Building the ANC, building the party, making sure that we are defending people against the attacks, and making sure that the negotiation process understood the balance between using power of organized people and the negotiating tactics in the actual CODESA negotiations.
With Madiba in the lead.
Of course, he's in the lead.
Now, let me tell you why I'm asking you this. Because I just wanted to go back a few steps. Because prior to his release, when information came out that Madiba was in fact speaking to the regime, a lot of people started talking about Madiba selling out. And information came your way, for example, together with your comrades at the time, that Madiba had started selling out, and many of you were concerned. Now, when you are looking at him and having seen, the, shall we say, fruits of that process, what was going on? What was going through your mind?
Well, the first thing is it's information. It's an asymmetry of information. You've got to have information before you make any decisions. I think there's a sort of misinformation on this matter. I mean, negotiations is the lifeblood of the trade union movement. Without negotiations, we don't have a trade union movement, because every single day you're negotiating about something. And when things get out of control, there's always a sideline of a negotiation where we have a channel to bring things back on the tracks. So there was concerns. Of course there are concerns. And they are legitimate concerns that even Mandela understood. And that's why he spends so much of his time trying to explain what he was doing. What Mandela was doing was not negotiations, was preparing for negotiations, setting the terms. And in the process of developing the actual foundation and our demands, which we got agreement around in terms of the Harare Declaration, we were all on the same page. So I think this issue is a bit of a storm in a teacup. Yes, there are some people who felt that he was selling out.
And you were not one of those people?
No, I don't think in the trade union movement we would not think that.
You understood him perfectly?
No, we didn't understand him perfectly.
What was being
No, we didn't
done.
understand him perfectly. Of course, because...
You had your doubts, but...
Yeah, because any process of bringing people together who are adversaries is a complicated process. But like Madiba says, you don't negotiate with enemies. You negotiate with your enemies. You don't negotiate with your friends. So I think the thing of, did Mandela sell out, or did people think? Yes, of course there were people that did think that. But I don't think they were the majority. Did people have concerns? Of course we all had concerns. I mean, I couldn't even go into meeting with employers without shop stewards with me, without taking a mandate from workers. And if I did that, people will suspect me of doing things behind their backs.
But you were fortunate enough to have a constituency, a defined constituency, that could give you a mandate before you go and do anything. He was in prison. He had no constituency to consult before
but there were ways.
Speaking to
Yes, and that's why, in a sense, exploring talks about talks. Is there some common ground? It's not something you can do by committee. It takes an extraordinary leader to reach out across the abyss of a division to say, is there something we can talk about? And I think that must be understood. And that's the failure today in many parts of the world of us making those breakthroughs. I think the issue with Mandela, and that's his foresight, and something I completely accept, his leadership on. He has the foresight and the intuition to recognize how to make someone a partner. And how to find the shared interests and get people to rise above what are the constituency interests.
Okay. Now, let's then go back to the negotiation process. What struck you about Madiba that you didn't know or never imagined about him?
Well, he can be quite forceful. He gives this impression of being a sort of cuddly grandfather. But man, he is a man of steel, And I can recognize that because in a sense, if you've had to fight the battles at the coalface in the 80s, you had to have some steel in your body, where you have to make tough decisions. And those decisions have dire consequences, including people dying. When I had to marshal Cosatu into massive, strikes that stopped the country, it's not that we didn't understand there would be casualties, So you can recognize that in him. But he has this ability to reach out in a way that none of us could to the most unusual suspects. Having tea with the wife of the architect of apartheid, Mrs. Fairfoot, calling, President de Klerk at that point, a man of integrity, making, standing in that platform in making that speech at King's Park at the height of the violence and telling people to throw their weapons into the sea. So that's what makes him the extraordinary leader, that he's not afraid to say the unpopular things because he believes it's right. And often it is right. But it's also the issue that I could disagree with him. When I was a minister in his cabinet, especially when I was Minister of Communications, I can give you an example. He would call me up one day and I had to have breakfast. When you have breakfast at Madiba, then it's something a bit serious, Yes, there are many people that are wanting this license, Jay. And, there are some senior comrades in the movement that have approached me. And my advice to him, stay as far away from this as you can, because every single one of them will claim to have some connection. And my advice is that we have a regulator, stay out of it.
Did he ever do that? Did he ever approach you to say, so-and-so wants something? Please consider it.
Mandela is that we never worked for him, we worked with him, and he trusted us, trusted our judgment.
Take me through that first call when he said when...
In fact, I had a sort of hesitation about going into becoming a politician. I didn't become General Secretary of Cosatu to end up in the cabinet, be in the cabinet. And so in that discussion, he says, well, it's very important that someone like you is in the cabinet. This is even before he becomes. Cosatu in 1993 at a congress that he spoke at, and he made a very interesting comment. He says, must do the ANC what you did to the apartheid government. It's intuition about that. And as a result of those discussions,
Cosatu best moment with him while in cabinet? Well, during cabinet discussions.
I always knew that I had his support. I think that Mandela's instincts were always right. And that's something that he made absolutely clear to his guidance. He never got involved in the detail. But if there was something that needed his focus, he would do that. But I think in that first 5 years, Mandela's role was reconciliation, not as a strategy of weakness, it was a strategy of strength. Because we were at the edge of a precipice of a racial civil war, even dangerous after the elections when he was president. People do not understand how close to the edge we were. And that was his extraordinary focus, to make sure that he was building a nation in which the institutions will outlive him. And I think that was his extraordinary commitment. I would remember debates where there were furious debates about the TRC, and he would remain firm about the need for there to be a Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and for us in the ANC to completely, fully support this, because it was the right thing to do. But there were moments outside of that that I found really extraordinary.
Let's talk about those.
Well, I remember at my wedding, 1991, I'm getting married. I never thought I'll get married, but I got married to Lucy, and that's why today I had to go into the stadium with her and with our son and almost close the loop of that. And he arrives at the, I know Jay for a long time. I never knew that trade unionists will wear a suit. And so he could take it of RDP. I am, going to the launch of the Masikani campaign. It is the launch about service. I go in, very embarrassed, pick him up, bring him back. He goes back again. And then I say, well, to my wife, Lucy, I said, it's your turn now. So she brings him back. The third, and that's the picture of him, like standing completely silent. Wouldn't mind, I don't know what, Madiba wants, it's like, sometimes it can be quite imperial, about it.
Yes.
And so I go up. There, and there's a magazine into trouble. You better go and explain to Lucy about this before she reads it. And so I go down. And I'm like, tell her, because it was going to get public. The last time I saw him, was, I went with the family and went to say goodbye. And, it was a few years ago when I took a family to say, to go and.
How was he then? Was he still?
He was okay, but it was clear that, the age was beginning to take its toll. And so I visited him for a cup of tea, and we had tea, and he asked, some interesting discussions we had. And then he sends everyone out of the room.
Did he ask you if you are making a lot of money these days?
Well, no, he knew I'm out of business. I'm back to where I started. I sort of chair a global foundation, and it involves Grasa Machel. So, she's been very much associated with Gavi, and so for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been full-time volunteer back to where I started.
So what did
so
you
anyway,
talk
so he
about?
kicks everyone out of the room, and then he says, Jay, you're putting on too much weight. I said, oh, okay, Madiba. Do you exercise? I say, I exercise almost every day. He says, you must buy this big exercise ball. You must put yourself on the ball and you must go around the room a few times. And then you will lose weight. Madiba giving me advice on nutrition when I chair one of the biggest global foundations that deals with nutrition in the world, And I think that's what makes him an extraordinary human being, He just has this meticulous sense of paying attention, so that when you meet him, you feel that you are the center of his universe. You feel that he's giving you attention. It's not a sound bite when he holds a child.
Or small talk.
It's not small talk. It's about a deep meaning. I can remember when my mother-in-law, who comes from Canada, there they don't even take the keys out of the car. When my wife first arrived, she didn't even know what a burglar guard was. And he knew that she was concerned about her daughter's safety. And so when her mother was here for a visit, and she was having a birthday party, a birthday. So we said, no, okay, we're going to have a birthday lunch, and we'll have a surprise guest. We didn't tell her. Madiba arrives. It blew her out of her mind. And it was just before he was that day he was leaving to go and receive his Nobel Prize. And there's Cami is then 1 year old. And he had a problem with reflux, so he regurgitates. his lunch onto Madiba. And so my wife Lucy is in a panic, you know. It's like, how do we clean up here? Apologize again. He starts laughing at her. He says, you know, Lucy, the one thing that I missed in 27 years in prison is children, the laughter of children, to hear them jump on me, to feel them. And I think that's what makes him an extraordinary human being, because he's special. He gives us the sense of wanting to be better human beings. And so, you know, even today in the stadium, you know, even though it was pelting down with rain, you know, and people had their umbrellas up, under each one of those umbrellas, the sun was shining, you know. It was Mandela. And we were desperately saying, can we come back to these values? Can we, there's such a massive outpouring of grief. Can we use this grief, which is celebration as well as sadness, to build the South Africa that he led us into, that is going to ensure that that better life is delivered? And I think that's what people were trying to reclaim. And I think it started off like that. And that's why I went and stood in the queues, and I sat in the public stands, and I listened to people and danced with them, and they sang. And then the official ceremony started, and it ended the people's celebration. It became a celebration of leaders. And I think that there were two things that happened today.
But is there something inherently wrong with that, given that this is a global icon?
No, sure. I know. I'm not saying there's something wrong with that.
Loved him. Yes.
No, it's not something wrong with that.
Do you think it should have been done differently?
No, I think that the speeches were too long. We were standing in the stands in a pelting rain, and people wanted to dance. They wanted to express their joy. They wanted to celebrate Mandela. So, you know, I'm not saying anything is wrong. I'm just saying that we've got to have that sense. You know, when Mandela wears the number 6, you know, jersey and goes onto the grounds, you know that he knows the people. He knows our psyche. He knows what makes us tick. He knows what liberates us. We want to be liberated today in South Africa. We want to feel that the future belongs to us, and particularly young people. Because I listen to young people. I spend all my time today, these days, in villages, in slums, because I deal with a campaign against malnutrition and hunger. There are 1 billion people that go to bed hungry today, without food to put on their table. What did Mandela stand for? Not celebrities. He didn't stand, he stood for social justice. He's an icon today, because of that, of his commitment to social solidarity. His identity is that with people who are fighting oppression.
Now, we've run out of time, but I want to ask you this. If you had all the time or dedicate the rest of your life to, in honor of Madiba, to make sure that you carry on from where he left.
Times a day. That's what I want to do. And that's where I think I am making the contribution to taking Madiba's legacy forward.
Mr. Naidoo,